Reed Packer take great pleasure in introducing our family history. I arrived in the state of mortality on May 25, 1920. I was born at home on a dairy farm north of Franklin, Idaho. This very small community was originally known as Nashville and affectionately known as Buttermilk Curve. As a small baby, I had pneumonia several times one year. When the doctor informed me that my father, that I was probably dying, he executed tremendous faith that all would be well with me. I'm indeed grateful that he had that wonderful faith. He saw the family crest, and here's LSR at the age of 1 year in 1921. Here my mother and father, two oldest brothers in the wagon, Orion and Vaughn, at the old home. This was taken about 1960, and the home was 16, and the home was probably built about 1885. Here, my second to youngest sister, Nada, James, and Doyle, and the family dog. Here, this fellow was evidently elected or selected chief cook and bottle washer that day. My mother at the wheel. From Wright, James, Malloy, and Doyle. Vaughn, my brother, and I, in 1932. My father and mother were outstanding parents. When I was a very young boy, I came into the house. After sledding, my hands were excruciatingly cold. Here we are at Martin Harris' grave in Carson, Utah. My father, Vaughn, and James and I, my mother in more recent years. When I was a young boy, I came into the house after sledding. My hands were very cold. Mother very lovingly took my small hand in hers and held them until they were warm and comfortable. My father in earlier years. Here, the large graduating class from Franklin, Idaho, and Franklin High School in 1937. Here, the diploma proving my graduation. My father was very successful in teaching us the work ethics. The cows had to be milked every day. Here, Vaughn and Rebecca, Vaughn and John, Nada and Osborne, Nadine, and Ray Osborne, and James and Hannah D. Here we're looking north to the old farm out of Franklin, Idaho. Here some of the old outbuildings, the farm, chicken coops, were built probably about 1890. This was taken probably about 1960. Here on the left, Vaughn, and then Doyle and his daughter, who has got to be Janet, Jennifer, or Melanie, and then Vaughn's three children. It had to be Darla, John, and Sherman. Here the same group, still the old outbuildings. Bring back a lot of memories. My father very successfully taught us the realistic work ethics. The cows had to be milked twice each day, 365 days each year, and in addition had to be fed and cared for. Here's the old grade school and high school where I attended for a number of years. Here are the two girls again, just this side of the old grandstand and ballpark in Franklin. There are the Wasatch Mountains behind. Here are my two sisters, Irene on the right and Laura on the left, in front of the Relic Hall in Franklin, Idaho. Here we have the old Scout House on the right, the gymnasium in the middle, and you can see a part of the chapel on the left. Many fond memories. Here's a picture of my mother and father's grave, and just a lovely setting there in Franklin. There, Doyle and his daughter again, posing. Here, the entire family except me and my father. So, of course, taken many years after my father had died. Now, here we have the entire group, my mother and all the children, and we notice now that we've included father in this nice picture. Here's my patriarchal blessing. These cows had to be milked every day, 365 days each year, and in addition had to be fed and cared for. Cleaning the barn and chicken coops were especially arduous tasks. We raised hay, sugar beets, wheat, barley, corn, oats, apples, and peas. Thinning beets by hand is a plain, back-breaking job. Topping the beets with no cinch either. Irrigating all of these crops took a lot of hard work because we attempted to flood the entire areas. The peas had to be harvested at night, and work was done in addition in the regular day's work. I was probably 14 and 15 years old when I took a large load of peas to the vinery. I stopped at the top of quite a steep hill and applied a rough lock. That is a device to drag one wheel to slow up the wagon while descending the hill. The team of horses could not pull the wagon with one wheel locked. I had to remove the rough lock and go down the hill at breakneck speed. One horse was just a trifle slower than the other, so I encouraged him to keep up. By the time we reached the bottom of the hill, we were going just as fast as the horse could possibly run. Fortunately, there was no cars coming. A number of things could have happened to us, but we were protected undoubtedly. The winters were quite severe. We had lots of snow. Temperatures dipped considerably below zero. Emily remarked that every time I told the story of this portion of my history, it was colder, the snow was deeper, I had to get up earlier, and there were more cows to be milked. One day my sister, Malloy, brought in the cows at milking time and informed me that one of the cows was lying down and would not get up. I realized that something was radically wrong and ran nearly a quarter of a mile just as fast as I could. It was evident immediately the cow was bloated. She was lying on the wrong side for me to cut a small hole in her stomach and allow the excess gas to escape. I grabbed her legs to turn her over and she managed to kick me and send me sprawling. I jumped up quickly and proceeded with the operation. However, it was in vain. Her kicking was her last movement. Had I been just a few minutes earlier, I could have saved the cow. My father and mother discussed missionaries after a missionary had reported his mission at sacrament meeting. Father remarked, "I hope we will have this pleasure with all of our 5 sons and perhaps with some of our daughters." After his death, 3 sons served missions. When the youngest brother Doyle went out, the other 8 each sent $5 or $10 per month to sustain him. This served to establish a very commendable closeness in the family. I was 14 when my father died. This was especially difficult for my mother. There were 4 in the family younger than I, and I was 14 at the time. Everyone worked hard. Each one did his part, and a great deal was accomplished. All 9 sons and daughters have been married in the temple. Here's a letter my mother wrote in her handwriting in 1965. A very nice memento. All of the brothers missed quite a lot of school in order to get the farm work done. In spite of this fact, all did very well. We strung a cable between 2 trees, one end high up in one tree, and at the base of the other. We attached a rope with a pulley, came riding down with great glee. We were very busy on the farm, but still found time for enjoyable recreation from time to time. I was driving a team with a rectangular-shaped leveler made of timbers. I stopped and went back to shut a gate. Something spooked the team and they very started to run. I ran very quickly and grabbed the team control lines. I was sliding upright on my feet, but could not even slow up the team at all. Only when I managed to brace my feet on one of the cross beams, giving me considerably more leverage, was I able to stop the horses. A neighbor was watching from some distance away and was very fearful that I might be dragged under the heavy beams. Again, I was protected. I had a wonderful home life. Life was very pleasant, and this was during the very severe depression of 1929 and after. Money was very scarce, but thanks to the farm and cows, we had sufficient. We rode 3 miles to and from school in a canvas-covered wagon in the fall and spring, and the same unit on a sleigh in the wintertime. There was a small stove at one end, and there was always considerable competition to sit close to the stove. However, those close were too warm, and those farther away were too cold. It just wasn't very much of a happy medium. Ah, youth. The poets are absolutely right in the praise thereof. It was a most delightful time. We should have enjoyed it even much more than we did. After completing high school in the spring of 1937, I continued working on the farm that summer and fall, and then commenced college at Weber in Ogden, Utah in January of 1938. Due to the tremendous generosity of my sister Laura and her husband Herbert Farrell, I was able to go to college living with them. I worked before class in the early morning for my tuition and after classes for Herb in his service station and delivering coal. I would leave the coal yard with a load of coal, wave enthusiastically and call out, "I'll be back in a flash with the cash." College life here. There says vote for. You can see in the inset my picture. I thoroughly enjoyed Weber College. I managed to get fair grades, and although I was working quite hard, I found time for social life. There's the Engineers Club, and there on the front row, third from the left, you can see my picture. And I attended the football and basketball games, dances, plays, etc. I found some very lovely young ladies to date, and this was a very happy, enjoyable time of my life. There was a picture of the picnic in the spring. These experiences cannot be duplicated, and every young person should attend college if at all possible. All of the aspects are invaluable: professors, classes, fellow students, social life, sports, etc. After obtaining an Associate of Science degree at Weber College, I interrupted my college work, served a mission, served in the Army during World War II, and then continued my college work at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. That fellow has it almost as nice a golf swing as mine. I was married and we had a daughter. I attended the university full-time, and then due to lack of funds, I worked full-time for 4 more years and attended the university at night. These were very busy years. Most of the time I was able to schedule my lab work on Friday nights because these labs continued sometimes until 11 and even after work. You think that machine would be able to work all right if I didn't have my foot on it holding it down? Emily did considerable typing for me and said I needed to be with her. I needed her to be with me in the room while I was studying, but she's not allowed to talk. Perhaps her name should also have been on the diploma. I found my entire educational career very fine. It has not only prepared me for my profession, but has enabled me to be in a position to enjoy life in general because I have broadened my capability to be happy. Here's my diploma from Weber College. I later graduated from George Washington University as an electrical engineer. I served as a missionary in Brazil from June 1940 to December 1942. Later I served a stake mission, and then Violet and I served as senior missionaries at the Los Angeles Visitor Center from December 85 to June 81. Here's my father and his companion, about 1911. I entered the mission home in Salt Lake City in June 1940. The mission home days went very quickly and were very fine. Here's a picture of all those missionaries. We heard a number of the general authorities, and it was outstanding. The spirit there was just ideal. I was first assigned to work in São Paulo. We worked in a beautiful part of the city and did not find many people interested in the gospel. We found one sister who had been acquainted with the church in Germany. Here's a young man that looks like he might be tired on the sidewalk. She was interested and had been for a long time, but had never joined the church. She said that she was very much afraid of the water, and this was the reason she gave for not being baptized. Actually, we never did find any other reason. I left the city soon after that. We do not know if she was eventually baptized or not. My companions in São Paulo as a missionary, it was quite a challenge to learn the language. While learning, I would listen intently while my companion was talking with investigators, and I would write down words which I did not understand. Missionaries and friends. Then during a visit, I would discuss these words with some of the younger members of the family. When I would get stuck with the explanation in Portuguese, then I would ask my companion for some help. Here's some missionaries and friends. Doesn't take very much explanation. From São Paulo, I went to Piracicaba in the interior of the state of São Paulo. Before I arrived there, another church had seen fit to publish and circulate a pamphlet calling us undesirable guests, hóspedes indesejáveis in Portuguese. We swam too. However, their endeavors were quite in vain. Sometimes it appeared as if curiosity was aroused. Another time, in another city, a minister of another faith advertised ahead of time that he would preach a sermon and tell all about the Mormons. We attended a part of that meeting and heard part of what he had to say. He had a lot of things to tell his congregation about the Mormons. They were neither complimentary nor factual. Again, this did not appear to be nice tropical fruits. My next assignment was in Campinas, just a couple of hours away from Piracicaba. In Campinas, we had rented a hall for our meeting. Someone did not want us there, and we were asked to move out. The president on the right rear, missionaries. Here's a man tracting. We still had a contract and told them we'd move out after our contract expired. One evening, during a meeting, someone pulled the main switch and we were in the dark. I was speaking at the time and found it quite difficult to continue because I had not learned the language too well as yet. The lights came on in a minute or so, and we did not have any further trouble. For me, it was a long minute or two. We soon found a better location and moved. We made many good friends here, paving the way for a fine branch of the church to come. As in Piracicaba, we managed to make friends with a number of young people, and many things were going quite well. 3 fine missionaries. From Campinas, I went to Belo Horizonte, a very beautiful city. Belo Horizonte means beautiful horizon. We managed to increase the number of cottage meetings while doing a lot of tracting. I really enjoyed the cottage meetings while tracting was somewhat of a chore. Here I met a sister who showed some interest in our message. When I was ready to leave the city, I went to tell her goodbye, and she asked me to be baptized before I left. She had grown to appreciate the gospel. She had a beautiful little baby, and I took some pictures of them. The district president went and talked with her, and she was convinced that she was ready to be baptized. We went as a group to a very nice lake for the baptism. One of the other missionaries took a picture of the two of us standing in the water just prior to her baptism. The lake was very calm, and her image shone clearly in the water. This was the culmination of my efforts there and made me feel very good about everything. She wrote a very lovely letter many years later. When I received the letter, I searched out the picture of the little baby, and it brought back many fond memories. From Belo Horizonte, I went down south in the state of Santa Catarina to labor in Joinville as district president. Here's a picture of the beautiful beach at Copacabana in Rio. In Joinville, I enjoyed my labors greatly. We had a building there and had many good meetings and socials as well as conferences. I acquired a unit to take flash pictures. I poured a small quantity of flash powder on a little platform, turned off the lights, opened the lens of the camera, set off the powder with a cap, closed the lens, and then turned on the lights. There was appreciable smoke, but I managed to get some very good pictures, which I cherish. We had an operating relief society, and they gave lessons with some regularity. This couple was called Mom and Pop Ross, but they never did join the church. The primary is working quite well with the ladies and the assistance of the missionaries. The Sunday meetings were very nice. We were giving talks in the meetings very regularly and enjoying it a good deal. We had an MIA doing quite well, especially the socials. When President Sigmiller came for conference, I translated for him and also for Sister Sigmiller. It was quite a challenge to translate for him because he was anxious to move right along. Often he would continue his talk before I'd finished translating his last sentence. Very interesting. It was a very fine conference and was greatly enjoyed. One of the conferences, 4 of the missionaries came and visited from Curitiba. They had made up a quartet and sang very well. Everyone enjoyed them immensely. We had an opportunity to give a blessing to a little non-member. The people were friends of members of the church. After we finished, the man offered us money and was quite surprised and grateful when we told him we did not accept money for any of our labors. Here in Joinville, we took care of the little chapel with help of the members. We bought and hung new curtains working with the Relief Society. They were light and airy, made of light material and of tan color. We liked them very much. Here we were able to work a lot with members and enjoyed them. This was the first opportunity I had to work with members. One of the very pleasant experiences in Joinville was to visit the members of the rural areas around the city. This country work was great. Many times these people of very humble circumstances would make a very small tithing contribution and would always feed us. It was interesting. The old missionary whose legs were very accustomed to riding bicycles would go right ahead, up the steep hills, and then sit down and wait for the new missionary to come puffing up the hill. After a few weeks, the muscles would develop and movement was easier and faster. We just saw investigators. One family came to conference by wagon. We periodically went and visited a family in a small town some distance from Joinville. We would take our bicycles on the train, ride out and visit, spend the night, and then ride back on our bicycle about 30 kilometers. Very enjoyable. It was with some reluctance I left Joinville and started for home. I did not like to think of that very long bus ride, so I bargained with another missionary, sold him a pair of my shoes, and then took the plane to São Paulo. I thoroughly enjoyed my many companions and other missionaries. It was great getting to know so many fine men. I have managed to keep track of a number of them as the years have gone by, and this has been very fine. My first mission president, J. Allen Bowers, was a very fine man. Many years later, I was to work with him very closely as a sealer in the Washington Temple. This again was a very enjoyable experience. At the time of my mission, we laid a lot of groundwork and planted a lot of seeds. Although we did not baptize great numbers, our work has really borne fruit as the church began to make rapid strides some years later. Family of members and a missionary. In my work in the Temple in 1976, I met a few bishops and stake presidents from Brazil. Some of these men were born about the time I was in Brazil or even later. Very intriguing. Building of the church and joined Billy. A wonderful 2.5 years. It was a very profitable experience for me in personal development as well as spiritual. I became much more of an expert and gained considerable self-confidence, so the mission experience has been invaluable to me in every walk of life. Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It becomes more enjoyable year after year. We remember the many pleasant experiences in Brazil. My stake mission was also very nice, and it was very successful. Here's the conference I'm talking about. Violet and I enjoyed our work on a mission to the Los Angeles Visitor Center. Willette went to Arizona and visited with my sister Nada, where I played golf for a few days. I gave the tours primarily in Spanish and enjoyed the folks immensely. While Violet was acting as a great greeter, she decided it would not be necessary to have Spanish folks wait for a tour. Each time a group would arrive, Violet and I immediately led them to where I was in the town. Just before you saw one of our converts, one of our stake missionaries. Here's the lady with the baby I talked about who was baptized. I would stop on the tour, greet them, and go right on. This worked out very well. Then when a group would complete the tour, I would again stop, shake hands, and bid them goodbye. As a part of each tour, we encourage non-members to fill out referral cards to have to know more about the gospel by the young missionaries. When an individual filled out the referral card, this was called a golden contact. When I greeted a group at the beginning of a tour, I pointed out my wife. She would smile and wave at them. At the end of the tour, nearly everyone would go to Violet, shake hands, and converse with her in a very friendly manner. Those who didn't speak English still spoke to her, and the greetings were understood and appreciated. 18 months went by very rapidly. We drove from California to Virginia, stopping to visit friends and church historical sites. These visits were very delightful. Here's the story of that lady who was baptized, which was written in one of the church documents down there, one of the church magazines, and was just written up very delightfully. After she was baptized, not long, the missionaries were pulled out of Brazil because of the World War II. And then for many years, she did not find the church. She asked different people about the church, and they said, oh, that church doesn't exist here. And then years later, this little girl in the picture had grown up, and the missionaries knocked on her door. And then they found the church again, and she was just so delighted and was a very faithful member and participated in many different functions in the church, Relief Society, and teaching, what else. Here you can see that this lady was baptized by Elder Ellis R. Packer on the 16th of June in 1942. You can see here that she's telling her life history. Now you can see there that she's confirmed a member of the church by Elder Finn B. Paulson. 30 years later was the first president of the Temple of Brazil. Then she goes on to tell of her history there. And when she lost the church, it says she continued to pray. One day after the termination of the war, the missionaries knocked at the door of one of her daughters in Ipanema, in the state of Rio de Janeiro. And then she goes on and tells of the wonderful experiences she had in the church, and tells a little of her testimony. She said she knew that the church was the true church of the branch of God. And the Book of Mormon was an authentic registration. It was translated by Prophet Joseph Smith. by the power of God. She has an excellent memory and remembers with detail of the events that were marked in the church in her first times in the state of Rio de Janeiro. She remembers that the meetings were held with great spirituality, and have written about the people in the church. In these 38 years, she had many different assignments in the church and enjoyed it a great deal. She now, Sister Moima, believes that she'll soon be returning to her God. Here are the sisters in the church when we were in the mission, when we were in Los Angeles. Here my wife and I are on the grounds of the temple block in Salt Lake City, and here are two students really studying the gospel in the Missionary Training Center. That fellow must be talking and converting his wife. She looks more interested in the camera, though, than she is in him. The sister on the left was a missionary from Madrid, Spain. And here's some of the family that came to take the tour. I asked that young lady in Spanish one day if she had 24 missionaries, had 24 people lined up for baptism, and her answer was in Spanish, casi, almost. Now you just saw one of the banquets there when people would leave the mission. And here we had the pictures of the ladies of the mission. I entered the Army as a volunteer officer candidate. I went all through the test and began working for Uncle Sam. I reported to Fort Douglas in Salt Lake City in March of 1943. After a few days of preliminaries, I went to Camp Wallace, Texas, near Galveston. Here I was to undergo basic training. Here's a fine-looking young soldier. I was 23 years of age, and my health was excellent. And since most of this training was physical, I quite enjoyed it. For some of the older fellows, it was somewhat of a hardship, but for me, it was a breeze. Even hikes in those days were a little bit enjoyable for me. You can see this, a radar of a unit of a firing battery. This was no longer true when I reached the age of 40 or so. The Army basic training was quite well organized, and there was a minimum of hazing or pressure. Here you can see the large anti-aircraft guns being fired. From Camp Wallace, I went to Camp Davis, North Carolina for officer training school. Now the pressure was to begin. We took a 10-mile hike while another group took a 20-mile hike. It was somewhat warm, and one of the soldiers on the 20-mile hike died from heat and exhaustion. He may have had some disorder that the doctors had not discovered when he came into the service. This incident made us wonder what we were getting into. In this training, pressure was applied to find out if we had what it takes to lead men into battle. Saturday morning inspections kept us concerned. The weather was quite warm, and the men were marched onto the macadam areas, which seemed to increase the heat. We soon learned that while standing at attention, we could move nothing except our toes. Here's a couple of fine officers overlooking El Paso, Texas. By flexing our toes inside our boots, we managed to avoid fainting. There were a few men who keeled over from the heat now and then, and this was interesting. Here's a fine-looking officer in Kentucky. The men in the platoon were not allowed to help anyone in this case. The remainder of the men continued to stand at attention, and medics came to take care of those who fainted. We spent 4 long months at OCS and felt that we were working very hard. Here's a fine-looking officer with some Brazilian officers, and a picture of a Brazilian officer who was in the Horse Cavalry at the time and was taking a jump. There were some real compensating factors, however. Here's a man doing a very good trick with a jeep, and that's a Brazilian officer. The fellowship was very strong, and we often sang to help relieve the tension. There are some fine memories of these difficult times. As we came to the end of the 4 months, the examinations were 8 hours long, which included a lot of practical work. We spent considerable time firing the large anti-aircraft guns. We set them on the beach and fired out over the ocean. We shot at towed sleeves as targets. All of us especially enjoyed being the gunner on the crew. Here's one Brazilian officer and one American officer solving a very complex problem. The gunner would ram the shell home with his left fist while steadying himself by means of a special handle placed on the gun carriage for that purpose. Here's some Brazilian officers for whom I had acted as an interpreter. And here's a mixture, Brazilian and American officers. As the shell was rammed home, the large breech block would rise into place, pushing the fist out of the way. The gunner would then fire the gun and then make certain to take a step to stand clear of the recoil. This was all very different than anything I had ever done before in my life. Here we're on the beach in France, some of the fortifications. The post-intelligence officer, Camp Davis, was a church member and also a former bishop. When he saw me from the records that I had served as a missionary, he called me in and asked me to help with some special work. When that word got back to my battalion officers, it didn't do any harm at all, but it helped make things smoother for me. Here's a warning about artillery duds in an area. This same officer was very helpful to me on a leave situation after finishing OCS. Here's a handsome officer in Korea. He helped me obtain a delay en route to visit at home. I encountered a little difficulty in the marching process. My step and gait did not please the drilling officers, and they were wont to continually remind me to settle down in my stride. It was not a major problem, but was a situation somewhat unnatural to me. I managed to make out all right eventually, though. Again, here's an officer in France. I especially enjoyed the fine bands that provided the rousing music by which we marched. It was also intriguing to pay close attention to the music and make sure that the left foot hit the ground on the heavy beat of the drum. As we became adept at commanding the unit and giving the intricate commands, it was quite pleasant to look back upon it, but at the time it seemed quite rigorous. My Army experience served to really heighten my feelings of loyalty to my country and my thrill at hearing the Star-Spangled Banner and with the flag raising in passing. It also served to heighten my great appreciation of the great blessings we have in America. These feelings were many more times heightened when I saw the conditions that existed in the foreign countries I visited while in the Army. We've seen a lot of fortifications here in France. Again, my very good friend, the post-intelligence officer at Camp Davis, helped me by assigning me to a military intelligence training camp at Camp Ritchie, Maryland. This was a particularly fine assignment at that time because the anti-aircraft artillery was just about saturated with officers. In addition, by going to Camp Ritchie, I met my future wife, so it really was a big assignment. Little did I realize that this assignment was to play such an important role in the future. Again, the training was somewhat arduous, but nevertheless enjoyable. This was a course primarily in aerial photo interpretation, in addition to considerable general knowledge about military intelligence. I became quite adept as an aerial photo interpreter. This skill served me well later in Korea. At Camp Ritchie, we had a chance to fire several foreign small arms, which I greatly enjoyed. Here's a case of returning home. One day here, we were on the firing range using a small rifle called a carbine. One officer on my side was encountering some difficulty in his firing routine, that is, in hitting the target as well as he wanted to. The fellow on the other side of him and I decided to help him out a little. During the rapid fire phase of the firing, each of us loaded a few extra rounds, and after completing our firing on our own targets, we switched over to his targets and put a few rounds into it. He's an Red Cross ship. His spirits were immediately raised, but soon found out what was happening and continued to practice his firing. Later, there were several old Brazilian missionaries stationed at Camp Ritchie, and it was thus a very enjoyable assignment. You just saw the Alcatraz Island. Near the end of our training at this location, we took part in a 3-day training exercise, which was to test our knowledge and our physical stamina. It consisted of hiking, carrying a full pack, and then taking part in exercise tests every few miles. The Tomb of the Unknown and another picture in the Arlington Cemetery. We were to sleep, for 4 hours, take tests, hike some more, and repeat the routine. This continued for 72 hours. During the first day, I ate some cold canned field rations, which just did not agree with my stomach at all. So I spent 3 miserable days. I kept telling myself that I felt so bad that I would have to turn myself in at the next station. I managed to make the next station each time and resolved that I would continue on for one more station, and dragged myself on for 3 days. I ate very little during that time, so felt quite weak. In the end, it made me feel quite elated to realize that I had not given up in spite of not feeling at all well. Here's our tent in Korea. There's some real cold weather. Soon after our marriage, we acquired a 1940 Studebaker Champion automobile, and we were quite pleased. An officer was leaving to go overseas, and he offered it to us at a very reasonable price. While we were talking to him, I told him that I did not have the money for it. Rather than suggesting that we borrow the money, he said, "You're a minister, aren't you?" I hadn't realized that he knew that I was a missionary. He went on to say that he'd be willing to trust me to pay the money to his wife within a few months. You can be certain that we did not disappoint him after he trusted us. We never heard from him when we sent the money. It appears as if he thought, "That's exactly what I knew you would do." It was a very nice feeling. Then in Korea again. After I'd gone to Europe, Emily taught herself to drive this car. I had been teaching her to some degree, but my patience was not what it should have been. She drove up the road to her grandfather's yard, turned around there, and returned to her father's yard and turned around again. These are all Korean hillsides. This she did over and over. At times the gate post at their father's yard managed to get very close to her. She maneuvered back and forth, but the post just kept getting closer. Her father did not mind replacing that post. Through practice, she became an excellent driver. I was very thankful for my patriarchal blessing during World War II and the Korean conflict. I was promised in my blessing that I would travel safely, and I firmly believe that it fully meant on land, sea, and air. It has been literally fulfilled in all of my travels. Here is marking smoke in Korea. After completing my training at Camp Ritchie, I had 2 training programs where I acted as an interpreter for Brazilian Army officers. One was a tank course in Fort Knox, Kentucky. One of these officers, Colonel Costa Silva, later became president of Brazil. This was an enjoyable endeavor and yet a large responsibility. In Japan, we found some very nice china. I took some pictures and sent them home to Emily to have her choose which type she wanted, and she made a poll in the film to show us. I really enjoyed translating and bantering the joking that went back and forth between the Brazilian and American officers. This is a real challenge in translating the meaning and not merely the words. The tank school consisted of complete tank training, schoolroom, and actually firing the tanks. This was my first experience in field artillery, in directing the firing of the tanks. I especially enjoyed the radio work in Portuguese. Many times it was upsetting and disconcerting to the American troops to hear all the foreign talk on their radios. On one occasion, the Brazilian officers were inside a tank firing machine guns at targets while moving very rapidly. I told the tank driver and crew that I would be talking to these officers in Portuguese as we proceeded. They thought it would be a novelty and it would not bother them at all. At the first run, they changed their minds and found it quite disturbing and asked me to keep the conversation in Portuguese to a minimum. It was immensely enjoyable for all participants. It was a very interesting challenge to translate the instruction and lectures to these men. Sometimes it was practical to have separate classes, and the instructor would stop after a few minutes and allow me to translate. Here, Koreans are harvesting rice and threshing it. This worked out quite well. During the other classes with American officers, it was more difficult to keep up because there were no pauses to catch up. My vocabulary as a missionary was somewhat lacking when it came to military vocabulary, so it was interesting. Apparently the translations went quite well because these men did quite well in their examinations. Special provisions were made for exams. The group of Brazilian officers and I were allowed to discuss the questions among ourselves before each man wrote down the answers. These men wrote and understood a degree of English, but we always discussed the questions in Portuguese and then discussed how to answer in English. This worked out quite well because it was evident that these officers learned a great deal. Not long after this group returned to Brazil, another group came to go through a school in harbor protection. Here are some of the Army intelligence dogs, including a complete mine field system in a harbor. This was held at Fort Monroe, Virginia. Again, this was an excellent experience. In this training, in addition to translating, I actually received credit for this course. This meant that I actually took part in all of the aspects of the course in addition to translating. On one of our early training experiences, this group and I were allowed to go through a problem first, and the remainder of the class had to wait for us. We did not have very good luck and held the others up for an hour or so, and they jollied us considerably about it. At the end of this assignment, I was given a very nice letter of commendation by the commandant of the school. He commended me quite highly for having done an excellent job with the Brazilian officers, and in addition, for doing well in the course. Not long after finishing this assignment in Fort Monroe, I was assigned overseas duty in Japan and Europe. Before leaving for Europe, we drove west on a 10-day leave. It was a hurried one. We spent more than 10 days traveling than we did visiting. We had a wonderful visit with relatives and friends and had the delightful experience of being sealed in the Logan Temple. Here's a picture of decorating the captain during a formation. My mother did not know of my assignment overseas, but when I bore my testimony in the temple meeting and expressed sincere gratitude for the promise of safe travel in my patriarch blessing, she then knew. We sailed in convoy and were escorted by our destroyers and other protecting vessels. One night we heard and felt the noise and jarring of depth charges, and we were up on deck in just a minute or so. Here again, I was very thankful for the promise of safe travel, and I was not as worried as I might have been otherwise. The next morning, we saw that one of our destroyers was flying a broom, a signal that they had sunk an enemy submarine. We reached Europe without further disquieting experiences, and the North Atlantic had never been smoother. It was just like a lake. Under unusual and also fortunate timing, we're in the harbor at Le Havre, France, when we received the news that Germany had surrendered. Truthfully, I felt very happy. This time passed rapidly, and after only a few months, I was ordered to return to the United States. As we sailed into New York Harbor, we were met by a welcoming vessel, complete with band and lovely young ladies. This was a very nice welcome. Just as soon as I could, I boarded a train north of New York City, which went underground, going into and out of the city. I went into Baltimore, from where I hitchhiked to Pennsylvania, where Emily was. In those days, hitchhiking was popular and safe, and servicemen did not encounter much difficulty getting rides. What a delightful reunion with my wife. Although our separation had only been 7 or 8 months, it seemed much longer, and our joy almost knew no bounds. We were extremely happy to be back together, safely. After a few days, I returned to Camp North of New York City, and again went into the city, so I had actually traversed the length of New York City twice without seeing any of it, although I had seen it at other times. From here, I received a leave after being overseas, and Emily and I were happy together. I had anticipated being assigned to the Pacific area, but again, I was very fortunate, and VJ Day happened about this time. Just a week or so had passed, and I received word that I could report immediately to Indiantown Gap Military Reservation in Pennsylvania and return to civilian life. I was offered an alternative to remain in the Army for a few months, helping with the large task of processing troops back into civilian life. I quickly elected to leave the Army and go back into my career. I had joined the National Guard in February 1948, and in 1951, the unit to which I was assigned was called to active duty due to the Korean conflict. We soon went to Camp Stewart, Georgia for training. After a few months, I was assigned as a battalion plans and training officer. I felt I was able to make worthwhile contributions. Part of this training consisted of firing the large anti-aircraft guns as field artillery. I took each battery and took them through this exercise, acting as a spotter, giving the command to the crews and firing on targets. Although these guns were not designed specifically for field artillery work, they could be used very effectively in this secondary role. Emily, Camille, and Annette had joined me in Savannah, Georgia. And although I could not spend very much time with them, I was very glad they were there. Emily drove downtown one day and made a U-turn on one of the main streets. Here are some of the Brazilian missionaries and their wives at Camp Ritchie. A policeman stopped her and proceeded to tell her that he wasn't very pleased. Annette, just 2 years old, was sitting in the seat beside Emily, just listening quietly for a minute or two. There were some of the officers, not only Brazilian officers or Brazilian Army, Brazilian missionaries, but others also. Annette then leaned over so she could see the officer and smiled at him in a very friendly manner. This disarmed the officer completely, and he forgot all about the lecture and a possible ticket. All he could think of was to say, "We're not so tough down here," and wave them on. While in Texas, I spent one weekend over in Arizona with Nate and my sister and her family. My mother was fishing there at the time, so it was doubly enjoyable. A few weeks later, my brother Jim came winging on down there on a training flight. We went into Juarez, Mexico, for an excellent steak dinner and had a very fine visit. We did a lot of catching up with each other because it had been a long time since we had been together. I guess it was in the winter of 1943 when I came home from my mission. This was in 1951. The two visits with family were the bright spots of my trip to Texas. On a training exercise at Camp Davis, we had been in the rain all day long and into the night. Although the rain was not heavy, it was steady, and it made everything difficult and thoroughly wet and uncomfortable. We had to pitch our tents after dark and then be up and fold up our tents before daylight. I found some of the burlap camouflage material that was dry after unwrapping a number of rolls, so using this, some of us managed to sleep fairly dry. At Fort Meade, where we were stationed, it was not an ideal situation. Here our trip through Yellowstone Park. There was a slight lack of enthusiasm in our assignment generally, and time dragged on for a few months. After I received my degree from George Washington University, I continued to work for the Potomac Electric Power Company, where I had been working while finishing my college work at night. At a company outing, one of the executives, upon seeing the girls, asked, "Where are the boys, Ellis?" Brett has not arrived yet. Here's a picture of Annette and me at our company outing. I worked in engineering, design, and layout. For many years, I spent several years in construction in addition. During storms, I helped direct the repair crews and helped plan methods of better repairing storm damage in order to get service restored just as rapidly as we could. During this time, the construction crews would work very long hours, and I experienced these long hours a number of times. On one occasion, I worked with a crew from out of town who had been brought in to help us, since our damage was so severe. We worked 16 hours or more per day for over a week. I worked as a coordinator. It was a rewarding effort because the people were so pleased when their electrical service was restored. On one of these days, we came upon a serious damage situation for a group of apartments. We started this job late in the afternoon, and it was quite late when we finished it. These people were very anxious about their electric service since they had been without it for several days. When we finally restored the service, the apartment people all cheered. Here's a picture of an outstanding safety award where I was involved. Over the years, I have made many good friends, and one especially Jakey Lichtenberg. He was of Jewish ancestry. Many times we have discussed religion. He visited our temple site with me when the building was under construction, and then came again for the temple preview. He took me through one of their synagogues, while it was being erected. We have worked closely together on specific problems, and it's been quite enjoyable. On one particular problem, a big welder, Mr. Lichtenberg was very cooperative. A customer had installed a welder without notifying the company, and it was a problematical whether or not we could allow it without him doing considerable heaving up of our facilities, which would be very expensive to him. Mr. Lichtenberg obtained the special instruments necessary, and we took tests on the customer's premises and also on adjacent customers' premises to determine the effect of the welder. Here's a picture of my boss and one of my cohorts. One special instrument used was a point-stop indicating ammeter. We managed to bring the problem to a successful conclusion without the customer having to pay out a lot of money. My work at the power company has always been quite good. I have made meaningful contributions over the years. My work has been interesting and rewarding. It has provided us with a good livelihood, and all in all has worked out well. Now you know that this is the case, there I'm saying. I have been able to get people to respond and work well under my direction. Here's the cake in my retirement. I've been able to get along well with people and consequently got considerable work accomplished. One man said to me that I only saw the good in men. I thought that was a nice compliment. Dear Violet and me at my retirement. If we concentrate on the good in people and treat them accordingly, they will respond very well. One time during a hot summer, we had trouble on a high voltage feeder. The old cable in the duct line had been there for many years that it had swollen inside the duct and could not be removed. The crews tried very hard to remove the cable and broke several pieces of equipment in the attempt. We did not have a spare duct, so we needed to remove the old cable. I was in charge of this operation. When it became obvious that the cable could not be removed, we had to do something unusual because of the necessity of getting the feeder back into service, because of the load on the system. I called several engineers for counsel and finally decided that we should dig a trench by the side of the duct pile and bury a cable direct bury in dirt in a several hundred-foot stretch. This was on a weekend, and there was a question about right-of-way since this was on railroad property. Due to the urgency of the situation, we went right ahead with the work. We continued working around the clock for the weekend. As we continued, we found that close to the end of the stretch, a large volume of concrete had been poured due to an unstable condition. This caused us additional difficulty. We were finally able to cut into the duct pile relatively close to a manhole and were able to pull out a short stretch of the cable at the location of the heavy concrete. There was a live cable right adjacent to the one on which we were working, and we had to work carefully. One man had to chip the concrete encasement from around the cable. Since he was not absolutely certain that the cable was not live, he worked with extreme caution, and yet with dispatch using a hand chisel and hammer. We could not take the adjacent feeder out of service because of the heavy load on the system. This repair work needed to be completed by Monday because the load would increase a great deal after Sunday. The large cable also had to be cut. After our test people had made their test, one of our men went right ahead and cut it with a power spade. He did not ask, "Are you sure the cable is dead?" but started without any question. I believe that I would ask for a double check, because if one were to cut into a live cable, it could be very serious. This man merely asked for proper identification of the cable and then went right ahead and cut it. He had the proper faith in his fellow men, and it worked out well. These men worked hard and long. Over the weekend and on Monday morning, the cable was energized on time. It was the only place on the system that a large high-voltage feeder was directly buried at that time. This was fine effort and was greatly appreciated. Here's some of the nice things said about me at retirement. In 1970, I was loaned from my company to the National Alliance of Businessmen in connection with the Board of Trade in a project to find jobs for the disadvantaged. I directed a group of volunteers, and we contacted businessmen, asking them to hire these people if they possibly could. Many of them responded very well, and we were quite successful. I still did quite a lot of work at my job, and still a lot with the National Alliance of Businessmen. This was quite rewarding and was appreciated. At that time, my brother James was working with the welfare organization on the West Coast, and we had some fun jollying each other about taking care of these people in one scheme or another. Upon my retirement, I received a nice plaque signed by the chairman of our board. Here's some of the work. Here's some of the things that were said about me. This plaque read, Pepco Meritorious Award, in recognition of your years of dedicated service to the Potomac Electric Power Company and the people of the greater Washington metropolitan area. This Meritorious Service Award is conferred upon you on your retirement from active service with the company, and signed by W. Reed Thompson, Chairman of the Board. I have been congratulated by our executives on several occasions. When I reported my mission in my old home ward, I spoke for 30 minutes, and it was a pleasant experience. Missionaries are welcomed home with a great deal of enthusiasm. There's Emily and Lillian at a very young age, and they really enjoy it. After the meeting, Mother remarked that she had really enjoyed my talk. Here's Emily at about 8, and added, I would have enjoyed it more if you had talked longer. She said it in all seriousness, Mother's love. Here's Emily. Soon after arriving at Camp Ritchie in October of 1943, I met Emily. We went out some, but I went to Fort Knox in February. I returned in May, and it was during spring and early summer that our delightful courting began. Again, I soon left to Fort Monroe in July, returning in September. Chord, play.
They close the door and kneel in prayer. We do not hear the words of Bishop Strong's prayer because Bill's narration comes over all this.
When Mother told me the dog, or Mr. Wilson told her the little girl had taken the dog, I started the investigation. So Doris Paxton.
Didn't call the FBI.
No, we were going to do that later. And she said, yes, a little girl, her little granddaughter's friend had taken the dog. So I told the little girl's mother, after she gave me her number, and the little girl's mother...
You heard a presentation about the dog here just a little bit of Emily's voice. We had a lovely courtship. Often after a date with Emily, I would hitchhike to Waynesboro, about 5 miles, sleep a few hours at the YMCA, and catch the early bus back to Camp Ritchie. We did not do a lot of spectacular things, but more of the homey type. Emily, her sister Lillian, and I often walked more than a mile to and from church, and they were fine walks. Here's Lillian and Emily together. We spent many evenings together listening to records, Emily fixing snacks. We also went to movies, sometimes on the Post. After a nice dinner together, we went to dances, sometimes driving to Washington, D.C. to church dances that were very nice. It was this time that Bing Crosby's very famous record, I'll Be Home for Christmas, was popular. I played it over and over during these evenings. They were wonderful memories. This recording was nostalgia for me of tremendous proportions. Sometimes I was not too lucky in getting a ride, so I did considerable walking. I said that I had completely worn out a pair of shoes during my courtship days. You've seen here a number of pictures of Emily as the years went by. During these days, I was a regular guest for Sunday meals at my future in-laws. One Sunday, I believe I had a very good appetite and did complete justice to the delicious fried chicken. My future mother-in-law passed the platter again, urging me to eat more. I answered, it is surely delicious, but our ladies shouldn't eat any more. In fact, I believe I have eaten 2 chickens. Without hesitation, she came back, well, they really weren't very big chickens. Wonderful. We had fun with Emily's parents, together with Lillian. They took me for rides in the mountains and many other items of special interest. We went to Gettysburg, going over the battlefield. We did this on our own, but in addition, we went there as members of the military, studying the battles and the strategy of the generals. This was outstanding. Here's a brand new second lieutenant with his bride. We attended many fireside evenings with former missionaries from Brazil, together with many other friends. There were and are many wonderful people in the Waynesboro area, both in and out of the church. I have made exceedingly fine friends there. Here's a wedding picture. I proposed to Emily and she didn't even give me her answer immediately. We were in different places for a little time after that. She soon wrote me a letter in which she went to some length telling me about and answering my proposal. As I read it and reread it, I wasn't quite certain just exactly what she meant. I put the letter in my pocket and saw her quite soon after that. I asked her to repeat so I'd know for certain. The letter was beautiful, but I wanted to be certain that she was accepting my proposal. She said very carefully that yes, she was accepting. To say the least, I was a very happy young man. It was only a few months later that our wedding took place, Emily and Lillian in her front yard. When the bridal party passed the security post on their way to the wedding, one of the men explained, "Here's the bride, do not delay her." We had a lovely wedding. Many of our friends and relatives were present, and at both the wedding and the lovely reception held at a lovely mountain lodge on the Sunshine Trail. An outstanding singer, a soldier stationed there at the time, sang 2 requested numbers, and it was just lovely. Here's Nada and Emily. In the reception line, the married Brazilian missionaries were terrific, giving their wives permission to kiss the groom. Brother Leo Black was the best man at the wedding. He and I had been roommates for some time and were very good friends. Here's Nada, Emily, Kathleen, and Lillian. And then the same group. Lillian had been Emily's maid of honor, and the two of them just could not do enough to help us, including transporting all the presents afterwards since we had left for our honeymoon. Here's the complete family. It was several years later that two of them met again in Utah, and they started going together seriously. Later they were married, and we like to think that we helped Cupid just a little in that process. Here are 2 lovely ballroom dancers. Only a few weeks after our marriage, I had officer of the day duty at the post, and this left Emily alone that night. So her mother made the 5-mile trip and stayed with Emily. Love personified. Soon after we moved to Washington to attend college, our ward bought an old firehouse that was built like a Swiss chalet. We were to renovate it and transform it into a church. Brother Glenn Taggart and I were very good friends, and spent considerable time cleaning the used bricks, which were the result of knocking out some walls. Later, he and I were the leaders in making concrete blocks by hand. We hand mixed the concrete and manually placed it into a block mold, tamping it down to be sure there were no voids. The mold was unfolded and removed, and the green block was carried away and placed to cure. When Glenn and I were on the team, we would keep all these operations moving at a very rapid pace. The brother carrying away the blocks was expected to run both ways, so he could hurry back to help with the next one. It was quite memorable. Once in a while, a block was jarred and had to be remolded, but this was infrequent. Later on, a contractor who was using these blocks in the church remarked they were very hard and apparently very well made. We lay members of the church laid a brick wall using the used bricks, and there were a few slightly uneven lines. But when it was painted white, it looked pretty good and was to stand for many years.
And now researchers are learning.
In fact, the last time I passed by, it was still in good shape, and this was approximately 30 years later. Here's Emily, Valerie, Camille, Annette, and Dad. I mentioned that we had bought a 1940 Studebaker Champion while in the service. We put many miles on that car, including driving west and back just before going overseas in World War II. After the war, it was really beginning to show its age. At that time, I was working for a man, Albert Tayman, at the power company. When I told him that the motor had over 100,000 miles on it and was using excessive oil, he very kindly volunteered to help me tear it down and put new rings in it. We did that in the back corner of the parking lot at our apartment. Here's what the children call the Bumblebee Bridge in Waynesboro. We used a jury rig made of 2 2x6s and a borrowed chain hoist. As a handsome man with some flowers, we removed the head of the engine and found that one piston wall was badly scarred. We talked to a good machinist. Here's a picture of Ellis, Mother, and Emily. And he said it could be rebored but put in an oversized piston, but was not enthusiastic about it. We thought about this, and after checking around, I found that I could buy a new engine for $120. Here's the lovely lodge where we held our reception on the Sunshine Trail in Pennsylvania. This was the thing to do when we installed this motor. It was very interesting and educational. When raising and lowering the motors, I stood on the front bumper and steadied the tripod, and Al guided them. Here's the hospital where Emily was born, or where Camille was born. He wouldn't take anything for his work. We became very good friends. A lovely chapel in Pennsylvania on the side of the hill where Emily attended, and we went together for some time. We went to Pennsylvania each fall and brought back peaches and would give him a bushel each time. Here's the candy kitchen, where Emily and I met very often. We always had several people to give rides to and from church. Sometimes we had a permanent sag in the rear springs when constantly overloading the car. We enjoyed all these people very much. When I was growing up, I well recall that my father would never pass up anyone without giving them a ride. Here's Emily's grave, and together with my name, and also our little son, who died at childbirth. Since we are a very large family, the car was overloaded to begin with. Father would always stop and even have a passenger or two riding on the running board. Here's her son-in-law, Doug Harrell. Emily had had attacks of appendicitis for some time, but none serious until one weekend when we were living in the apartment in southeast Washington, D.C. Here are 3 golfers. Very impressive. On a Friday night, she didn't feel good all night long. We called the doctor as early as we could on Saturday morning. He wasn't in, and Emily told the nurse about her symptoms. Fortunately, the doctor came in just a few minutes. Here's a couple of handsome people. He recognized that it could be serious and asked us to come into the office immediately. We did so, and he took tests quickly and told us he wanted to operate just as quickly as he could. Now here's the entire family, except for Emily. We hurried back to the apartment. I ran in with Camille, just a couple of years old, knocked at Phyllis Taggart's door, handed Camille to her and said I had to hurry and take Emily to the hospital. Before she could say anything, I was off and running. The doctor said that we'd have to hurry or he would beat us to the hospital. I drove as fast as I dared, waving a diaper out the window for want of a red flag. I proceeded to run through several red lights. Fortunately, the traffic was very light and we arrived at the hospital very quickly. Here's Camille, just 2 weeks old. The doctor was operating in about half an hour. Although he had told us to hurry, he did not panic us. When he took Emily to the operating room, he asked me to go out and wait. I went out on the sun porch and actually dozed. Here's Camille. I had full faith in him. He awakened me in a little while and asked if I wanted to see the appendix. He said it could have ruptured at any time, so we were very fortunate. And everything went very well. After the operation, I went back to the apartment, retrieved Camille, and explained to Sister Taggart what was going on. I do not recall exactly how now, but I'm certain Emily's mother came immediately from Pennsylvania to take care of us. At the time of the death of one of Emily's aunts in Pennsylvania, Emily and Lillian had gone up early in the day, and I brought the rest in time for the funeral. We arrived at the funeral home just a little while before the schedule starting. Emily was waiting out front for us. When we arrived, she asked, "Did the state police stop you on the way in?" We told her that they had not stopped us. She went on, "I called them and asked them to be on the lookout for you and to tell you that you were one of the speakers at the funeral." We thought about this and wondered how it could have been. There's an outing. I could have been actually speeding, and the officer could have stopped us and given a ticket. After issuing the ticket, he could have said, "By the way, you were one of the speakers at the funeral." We were asked to give out the message if we were to see you. That way you could have a little more time to think about your talk. Interesting. As it was, everything was just fine. Here's the backyard. Just about time we were adding on to the house and things were torn up a little. Another funeral story. At Emily's paternal grandfather's funeral, Brother Oscar McFerrin, I was one of the speakers. Emily's grandmother could not hear very well, and I was determined that she should hear my sermon. The only way to accomplish this was to talk very loudly. I did just this all through my talk, and she was able to hear it. She said that she did not hear very much of the rest of the services. That may have been the loudest funeral sermon in a long time. No one complained. You've seen a series of pictures here of the children in their growing up years. We had delightful times together while the children were growing up. They always loved the trips to Pennsylvania to see their grandparents and their relatives and friends. There are many things to do up there, going into the mountains searching for wild chestnuts, gathering wild huckleberries. This was rather infrequent because of the fear of snakes. But a pie made of wild huckleberries served hot with an abundance of vanilla ice cream is outstandingly delicious. We shot the .22 rifle, ox roast, carnivals, and etc. When Emily was growing up, their family went to Rehoboth Beach every year, and we soon began continuing the tradition. On one of these beach trips, we arrived just after a storm, and we walked for several miles and gathered up seashells. Here's a picture of Christmas time. We found a great many, some of them being quite large. In Southeast Washington, we lived not too far from a nice park. Very often in the summer, Emily had dinner cooked, and we'd take the hot pans and go down to the park by the river for our dinner. It didn't matter what we had to eat, we just took it with us and ate it hot and enjoyed it very much. There were generally ball games going on as well as other nice things. These were pleasant times. In later years, we picnicked on the Potomac, on the Potomac River at the company's recreation center. We were frying chicken on the charcoal when it began to rain one time. There's the old 1940 Studebaker champion undergoing a real wax job. We were frying the chicken in charcoal when it began to rain. In a little while, the rain slackened, but did not quit. I brought out the umbrella, pulled it over the charcoal, fanned the fire until it came back to life, and stood there in the rain until the cooking was complete. Here's a parade at the Glen Carlin Day where we live. It was a success, and we ate the food in the car because it hadn't stopped raining. The children laughed then in later years also about Daddy cooking the chicken in the rain with the umbrella. The first time we went to the beach, Camille was small, but she thought the beach was just great. When we walked down the water, the Atlantic Ocean, she looked at it, all of that water, and explained, there's just too much water. Let's take a cup and dip out a little. When the children went to the beach for the first time, they were just thrilled with all of that sand and would just walk off the boardwalk and sit down in the sand and start playing, rather than going down close to water. The children loved the beach, and we always went there at least one time each year, and sometimes more often. Here's a lovely bush that their grandfather clipped, and that made it look like a chicken. I was president of PTA for a few terms, and one of the things we did was to start serving punch along with the coffee that they were accustomed to. You saw a homemade wagon there that Camille's grandfather made. And here's the lovely lady at the beach. As we continued, people drank more punch and less coffee until, after some time, they drank such a little coffee we stopped serving it. At one PTA executive meeting, the hostess asked me if I drank carbonated beverages. Our non-drinking reputation was quite strong, and she extrapolated it somewhat. Here are the beach pictures. In addition to PTA activity, I was active in local civic work. I was president of the local unit for several years. In our community, we had a library which had been endowed by General Burdett many years ago. Through the years, our children used it a great deal, and we really enjoyed it. It was located just a couple of blocks from us. As a citizens association, we painted it. The building was 2 stories and concrete walls. It was quite an endeavor to paint it, but it was greatly improved. We also cleaned up an old cemetery and also the library lot, which had grown up with a lot of weeds and old trees. With this was quite a lot of work by the time we cleaned them and up and planted the grass. In later years, the county took over the old library and actually tore down the old building and built a nice modern one. In a library study made by a professional before the new building was built, the recommendation was made to build a new building away from the community. We had a fine man in Glen Carlin who took it upon himself to refute the study to help the library stay right close to home. He worked very diligently and successfully, and a nice colonial-type library was built on the old site. I was president of the Citizens Association, so I managed to get a lot of credit for much work done by this other man. This has been a blessing to the lives of all our children, helping greatly to install in them a desire to read and enjoy all the facilities of libraries. That man's name was Donor Lyon, a fine man. At a state conference in Washington, I met a member of the church who had served with me in Korea. I made arrangements to meet him in the evening with some of his companions to take them sightseeing and bring them home for refreshments. I was considerably delayed in picking them up, and I actually wondered if they would still be waiting. As I remembered, it was more than an hour and a half late. However, I decided I would go and check. I drove downtown, and sure enough, they were still waiting. Faith demonstrated. Beach pictures again. I showed them some of the sights and then brought them home where Emily had something for them to eat. One of the young men was particularly impressed and appreciative of us. So many people made in my life have been so nice to me that we made it a practice to try to make it up to such people as servicemen and missionaries. In later years, we built an addition to our home. Here's a grandson, I believe it's Conrad. When we first bought our home, it did not have a side screen porch, and I built that soon after we moved in. Our home is a two-story colonial type. The front door opened into the living room. Emily wanted an entrance hall, as well as another bedroom, bath, family room, and etc. The entrance hall idea seemed to be quite a challenge at first. Our good friend and neighbor, Zane Mason, was a builder and had architectural experience. He thought about the hall and said that it could be added on the outside of the house. Although he had been joking just a little, Emily immediately took him up on it, and we went to work. We built an extended porch on the front, put a window where the door had been, and we built a hall that Emily wanted. It extended along the side of the house back to the kitchen and on back to a new bath. We also built a large family room, a large master bedroom upstairs, and a basement underneath. It was quite an undertaking. We had a good friend, George Reynolds, who was a good handyman. He helped me with a lot of work part-time. Brother Mason helped us and sent his men to do the skilled work, such as bricklaying, etc. On a Friday, the bricklayers had built the basement walls and told Emily that they wanted to come back on Monday morning and continue on up with the walls. This meant that the floor joists and subflooring had to be put on for the hall and the family room. I told Emily that I just did not believe that we could get that much done by Saturday night. Soon Brother Mason dropped by, looked at it, and thought it could be done without too much difficulty. He came over Saturday morning and showed us how it should be done and got us started. That was a long and hard Saturday, but by the end of the day, the work was far enough along that the bricklayers could continue on with their work. Brother, now here's a fishing trip in Yellowstone National Park. Brother Mason and his brother Thomas really helped us on a rather loose contract. We also completed working over the kitchen, putting all new appliances and sink, etc. It was a nice job. At the end of the project, the final bills were presented, and I said that I felt we should give these two fine brothers an additional $100. We did so, and it was a striking project. Now here we are in Spain when we went to get Valerie from her mission. We went to the pageant at Hill Cumorah several times. Sometimes we went with friends or relatives, and then at other times the family went alone. We really enjoyed the pageant. One trip we made with Emily's sister Lillian and her family. We found a nice motel with a swimming pool which had a sliding board. We took pictures of children sliding down the board and flying into the water. Here's a family reunion in Idaho. They're here in Logan with my mother. This was the time at which would have been her 50th wedding anniversary had my father lived. On some of the pictures, we managed to catch them in midair, and these pictures were greatly enjoyed over the years. We often encountered old friends at the pageant that we hadn't seen for many years, adding a lot of additional enjoyment. One more item before we get to the church. We went to Williamsburg a number of times. Emily and I would leave home at a reasonable time in the morning, drive directly to the golf course. Here Emily let me play golf. Here's the bishopric. And then she went to pottery shop and other points of interest, and at the end of the day she would come and retrieve me at the golf course. During the day I made new friends and greatly enjoyed myself, as did Emily. We went to Florida, to Disney World, and everyone thought it was just great. We also went to Marineland and Myrtle Beach on this trip. The years continued to fly by. My father-in-law joined the church when he was 63. It's the Capital Ward, Bishop and Relief Society. He was very complimentary to me and wanted me to baptize him. He wanted to be baptized in running water, following the example of the Savior. Now here's some friends. This is a hayride of a group. At the time of Mother's passing in 1971, it was a time of beauty as well as sadness. She had enjoyed excellent health until just a couple of years before her death. I had the privilege of delivering a sermon at her funeral and was grateful for this privilege. we realized that she and Father were together again, and that they were very happy. One day at the temple, a brother came up to me and asked, "You remember me?" I could not place him immediately. He continued, "20 years ago, you and your companion presented the gospel lessons to me. As soon as he mentioned his name, I remembered him, his wife, and my companion at the time. It was a wonderful reunion." I was working in the temple. Here's a picture of a handsome man with a lot of azaleas. I was working in the temple when a brother came along in a wheelchair. He stopped and very enthusiastically exclaimed, "Ellis, it's good to see you. How have you been?" Here's our Falls Church ward where I was bishop for so long. The conversation proceeded, and I racked my brain trying to come up with a name. I couldn't, and finally told him that I could not call him by name. He retorted, "I really don't know you. I saw your nameplate and feel just wonderful here in the temple this morning and thought I could share my enthusiasm with you." Here's the Relief Society done in the building after a renovation, which is just beautiful. Soon after I was sustained a second council in the bishopric, an open meeting was planned for sacrament service. The program was on the bulletin would show that it was an open meeting, meaning that rather than assigned speakers, they would all be called from the congregation without prior warning. Just a few days before this planned open meeting, both the bishop and the first council were called out of town and would be away on that Sunday. The three of us, here's the Washington Chapel in Washington, D.C. The three of us made a list of people who we thought it would be appropriate to call upon. I was the only member of the bishopric in town on that Sunday and had been in the bishopric only a few weeks. After the meeting, there was an extra amount of visiting and friendly discussion in the cultural hall. Emily remarked that I might go a little hungry that night since I had called her as one of the speakers. I answered that I would go to Sister Louise Mason's for dinner. Here's Spain again. In that case, Sister Mason was listening and spoke up, "There's no use coming to my house tonight since you called on me also." This was all in very friendly jest, of course. Here's a castle on top of the hill in Spain. At a ward conference soon after this, my stomach was acting up somewhat, and I left the meeting for a few minutes. The lovely sidewalks in Spain. When I returned to the stand, the other councilor of the bishopric, Morley B. Christensen, whispered, "What's the trouble? Did someone present your talk and you went out to prepare another?" He had a very fine sense of humor. This is a girls' camp. After more than 4 years, as second counselor and then as first counselor, I was called a bishop, where I would serve for an additional 7 years. I was sustained on a Sunday evening, and only a couple of hours after the meeting, a little baby in our ward died. I did not have very long to languish until I felt genuine responsibility in the work. Although very sad, there was still great beauty in the little graveside service held for this little one. The baby is only a few weeks old. Here's a part of a Glencarlin Day parade. Flashback. Just after I was called as second counselor in the bishopric, Brother Bird Lisenby remarked, "That will teach you a lesson. You should have never bought that new suit and started carrying that briefcase." A young man in high school was converted. His name, Tim Flanagan. He was a stalwart from the beginning, and everyone enjoyed him. He and I managed considerable bantering in a very good-natured manner. At 7 in the morning, he called me and I asked him in a booming manner, "How's everything with you?" He answered, "Not very good right now, Bishop. My father just passed away." These are ward picnic pictures. I immediately called the Relief Society president, Sister Renda Sudweeks, and she was already there when I arrived a few minutes later. I then met his mother and sister the first time. The son was the only one who had joined the church. There was no question in the son's mind about who should conduct the funeral. The family was not very active in their own church, and his mother sensed that this would be very appropriate. His father was in the military. A military funeral is beautifully escorted and also is very brief. I sat down with the family that evening to prepare an appropriate eulogy. This good sister was very capable and very well prepared for the death. The man had been in ill health for some time and had been preparing the family. I continued making suggestions as to what might be said at the funeral, and she was very definite as to what she liked. Of course, it was my duty to continue asking questions and making suggestions until we had a nice eulogy. Years later, Sister Warner, one of our very capable stake missionaries, asked Brother Al Dixon about someone to teach. Al Dixon went to his father and asked him if he wouldn't like to hear more about the gospel. Father's response was, "Do the missionaries need more practice in their presentations?" Al allowed that this was so. This was not Sister Warner's idea, and she and her companion visited them very effectively. When this brother was asked to pray fervently to his Father in heaven regarding the truthfulness of the gospel, he did so, and they soon joined the church. The request to pray was the clincher. We moved an older couple from one apartment, and it was hot. As we went to install the air conditioner in the new apartment, we could not install it in the window, but could put it on a table close to the window. I then started cutting cardboard, and then with duct tape was making an air connection to the window. Here's the Joseph Smith home at Palmyra, New York. This was a jury-rig, truly, in all fact. Brother Al Dixon came in about that time and saw this cardboard monstrosity and laughed and laughed. He was a professional air conditioning dealer. I asked him if he would like to, as the Bishopric Mistake President, I asked him if he'd like to be without air conditioning in the heat, and he allowed as if he wouldn't like it very much. He then brought out his jackknife and began cutting and taping with me until we had the unit operating fairly efficiently. It required only a few minutes. The ward dinner. Brother Spencer Child and his family moved in the ward, and he had a rare sense of humor. We had at this time quite a number of young mothers and babies in the ward. As he spoke in the sacrament meeting, he observed this very fine situation and said, "I believe I have chosen the wrong profession. I should have been an obstetrician." Later on in the talk, he was doing even better. We had a new convert in the ward, a young man who was about to leave the area, so we had him speak before he left. His hair was somewhat long, and he was dressed very casually. In the course of his remarks, he stated that he's going to the Midwest and that he is spending his dog. Here is the apartment where we stayed as missionaries in Los Angeles. He stated that he's going to the Midwest, he sent his dog by plane, and he was going to go by bus. St. George Temple. This was very interesting. Brother Child followed this brother at the pulpit, explained, "You know, you had me a little puzzled about the travel arrangements until I was able to figure out that your dog had to be an Airedale rather than a Greyhound." Terrific. Not infrequently, during the early part of the sacrament meeting, we would like to have a deacon check the lights and sound in the cultural hall. The cultural hall was the overflow for the chapel, and we regularly had quite a number of folks sitting there. Our attendance was quite good. We regularly had 60% at fast meetings, and we often went well into the 70s. The checking operation developed to a fine point. There's the Washington, D.C. temple. A member of the bishopric would catch the eye of a deacon and point to his own eyes and ears, and the deacon would know just what to do. He would turn on additional lights as necessary, and then stand quietly checking the sound. He would then direct the brother at the sound controls to adjust the sound level as necessary. It gave the deacons an opportunity to do something a little special and feel that they're making a real contribution to the meeting. One deacon especially enjoyed this operation. When he received the sign language to perform these operations, he would point to his own eyes, his ears, wave his hands, a few extra motions, and then very sedately would get up and walk back and do the proper checking. A story was told of a brother some years ago who came in very regularly and paid his tithing each time he received his pay. Someone remarked that he could pay his tithing at the end of the year and then use the money to earn interest in the meantime. His remark was succinctly and spiritually expressed. What? And take a chance on missing out on all of the intermittent blessings? Here's the Los Angeles temple. Someone told the story of a brother who lamented, "I could pay my tithing if it weren't so much. Now if it were only 5%, I could do it all right." Salt Lake Temple. He appeared to be rationalizing. He apparently was not able to enjoyably take care of his obligation to the Lord. We continued to call on people from the audience without warning, other than a note on the program on Sunday morning. One evening, we called on a blind sister. Her name was Billy Ruth Schlank. She was really thrilled. Her friend brought her up the stand and showed her the way to the position in front of the pulpit. She told us she was now facing the congregation. This lady smiled very beautifully as she began, and it was a very uplifting experience for all concerned. These are couples who for whom I performed the wedding ceremony in the temple. Her husband was also blind. They obtained hymn books in Braille, and it was a delight to watch these people passing their fingers over the words and not missing a word. As Brother John Lewis was really getting along in years, his son Charles joined the church. I do not recall this elderly brother. Well, this is a Vietnamese wedding. Just lovely. Cambodian wedding, my wife said. I do not recall this elderly brother ever giving any talk from the pulpit. Brother Artel Ricks was taking charge of the day in the confirmation. Just after the son had been confirmed, Brother Ricks called on Brother John Lewis to come up and bear his testimony. This was actually a very warm feeling for Brother Lewis, and he was arising and starting to come forward before Brother Ricks had finished his request. These are the three wise men in the play. It was almost as if he had been expecting it. Of course, he did very well, and everyone is pleased. We were here, the bishop and his wife, at their testimonial after being released. We were not in an affluent ward, but the saints were very faithful in all of their contributions. Our record was outstanding. Sometimes building funds seemed difficult to raise, but we wrote a letter as a bishopric twice each year, commending the saints for their faithful work and contributions, and then in addition outlined goals for funds. This was the only mention we made about the building fund. We did not mention the subject as ward dinners and parties. At ward dinners, we actually had the dinner out of the budget, so people were not paying currently, and this went on very well. The money came in. We contributed generously to our stake center, several other ward buildings, the temple, and to a large renovation of our own ward building. We were very grateful for such a faithful and responsive ward family. A fireside was held for the teens at the home of Brother Kenyon Hackney on a Sunday evening. He thought it would be nice to serve some homemade ice cream, so he went to work with counsel and help from his wife and made a freezer. As he finished this freezer, he thought, what if some do not like this particular flavor? So they finished up the first freezer, placed the ice cream in the freezing compartment of the refrigerator, and then started all over and made another freezer of a different flavor, demonstrating in such a special way his and his wife's outstanding love for people in general, and in a special way their love for young people. Brother Gordon Forsyth was our financial clerk for some time. He was very faithful in his duties. At the time, he had a part-time job which kept him busy almost all night long on Saturday night. So he came to church on Sunday morning with very little sleep. In the afternoon, after working a while on his books, he would come in and say, Bishop, I'm going home and rest a little, then I'll be back and complete the work. In a few hours, he would return, take off his coat and shoes, and stay with the books until he completed them completely. Fine dedication. A mother was expecting, contracted the German measles, and all the family were concerned about the effects of the little baby. They had counsel from several sources, including an abortion, rather than take a chance on a baby being born with a deformity. The question was discussed about when the spirit enters the body. One of the general authorities gave her a blessing, and among other things was told that Michael the Archangel would attend that birth. The baby was born perfectly healthy, and was a wonderful faith-promoting experience. One Sunday evening about 9 p.m., when I had just arrived home, a call came from a sister in the church. Her neighbor, a non-member, was to be buried the next day, and his minister had taken ill. She wondered if I could come and take care of the funeral. I didn't hesitate very long, but gave her the bishop's stock answer. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I went to the funeral home, sat down with the family, asking questions, and encouraging them to give him some stories of his life. We were able to arrange a duet by two of the young ladies in the ward. I gave the eulogy and also the sermon, and all went very well. We managed to give them quite a favorable impression. Sister Ida Brown's friend was in the hospital. He was not a member of the church. She asked if Emily and I would visit him, so we did so. A couple of times. He seemed to enjoy our visits a great deal. We told him a little about the gospel as the opportunity presented itself. It wasn't too long after that he passed away, and his wife was so impressed with us that she requested I handle the funeral and also preach the sermon. Again, it was an opportunity to preach the gospel. I again sat down with the family for half an hour, making up a eulogy. Everyone was very complimentary about the services. Brother Reed Probst, one of our counselors, was talented and musically, as was his wife. He was in charge of the music in the ward and did an excellent job. At the ward conference, Brother and Sister Probst were involved heavily in the music, which led to stake. The stake president was to remark that the two of them have juggled the children back and forth without missing a note. Ideal. One fine brother told me of going to the bank at the end of the year to borrow money to pay tithing. He mentioned year-end bills and when asked for the reason of the loan, the official at the bank asked him if he could be a little more specific. He then went ahead and said, "I want to pay our tithing to the church." The bank official did not say one word. He just approved the loan without hesitation. The story is told of a stake president who was asked about paying tithing on one's gross or net income. Without hesitation, he answered, "Would you like the gross blessings or the net blessings?" Beautifully, spiritually, and practically answered. While I was bishop, there was absolutely outstanding cooperation in all the ward. We were very fortunate in all ways. We had a fine-sized group in every age, which helped very much. At our dinners and parties, the planning was done exceptionally well. The programs were well done, and the food was always planned to have plenty. Many times we had meat left over, and it was bought very readily at cost. The bishop's wife is always one of the busiest and always one of the most unsung. Emily received innumerable phone calls. It was not unusual for me to come home in the evening and take an hour's nap before going out. During this time, Emily would take the messages for me to call back and many times answer questions, saving me a lot of time. She was willing and able to take care of a lot of things. If a projector or anything like that needed fixing, she would take the repair shop, tell them it was needed for our church, and manage to have it back in operating shape for the next Sunday, or sooner if necessary. She would go to church, unlock the doors as necessary to meet repairman, explaining any additional details as necessary to see that it was done properly. As we all know, the brethren are not always available at all times, and Bishop's wife is. It was not infrequent that the repairman would be delayed, and she would be sitting there patiently for some time. She did all these things with an absolute bare minimum of complaining. Beautiful. We had a very nice lady in the ward who attended quite regularly with her husband and children. Her name is Phyllis Kohler. She had been coming to church for some years, actually. Her husband was a member of the church, as were her children. One day after a meeting, it occurred to me that I should invite her to join the church. I talked to her saying, "You know, we really need your lovely example to our young ladies, and she really would be a good member of the church." She was just a little surprised, but also felt good about me talking to her. Later, she came to the bishop's office, and we discussed the subject in some detail. When she arrived, she had been giving it considerable consideration and really could not think of any good reasons for not joining the church. The missionaries gave her lessons, and she was baptized just a few weeks later. It was a great compliment to me, and her husband asked me to do the baptizing. It was a very lovely experience and was greatly enjoyed. It's amazing how often people can be baptized with only a little effort. It was a great experience when I was released as bishop. The week before, Brother Probst, who was taking charge of the sacrament meeting, made the announcement that the stake presidency would come in attendance the following week to release the bishopric and call another. We felt that the congregation should really know what was going to happen, rather than just putting information on the program on the particular day. The announcement was made just before the final hymn. It had a profound effect on the congregation to the extent that the singing was almost non-existent, and the brother leading the singing sang only a verse or two, since there was very little singing. Normally our singing was very fine in the ward. The folks weren't expecting such news, apparently. A few weeks later, in the leadership of Bishop Zane Mason, the ward gave Emily and me a very beautiful program. My experience as a bishop. Here's the chapel in Joinville, Brazil. My experience as a bishop were truly wonderful, spiritual, uplifting, and faith-promoting. The Lord surely blessed the bishop to be able to do things far beyond his normal capabilities. When Brother Culmore ordained me a bishop, he said, "Bless the lives of the members in the ward." Later in the prayer, he repeated that phrase, and I've liked it so much and always remembered it. It was a tremendous experience. At no other time have I had such an opportunity to be so close to many people, love them so much, and be of service to so many. We had a fine priest advisor with our priests. He We initially found them just a little bit out of control during our quorum meetings. They were continuing the habits of youth. They were not too adverse to discussing various and sundry topics with each other while the lesson was being presented. This went on for several months, and the advisor suggested perhaps another man might be able to appeal to these fellows more and find more success in meetings. Here are pictures of the bishopric and the young people in the ward. These young men were doing just great, but were just a little restless in these meetings. Upon the special request that I made of him, he agreed to stay on a little longer. Soon after, things began to improve greatly. We do not know just exactly why, whether it was a maturing process or just what. In all probability, it was the love of the leaders. No, that's part of the our party when when I was retired as bishop. It was not long until these meetings were exceptional. The advisor, a medical student, was on duty at a hospital every once in a while, but the meeting started on time and went very smoothly. The fellows often gave the lessons, and the discussions were exceptional. All entered into these discussions with considerable enthusiasm. Here's my brother Doyle and his wife with their grandchildren. This advisor was Brother Gibbons. I interviewed one of these young men for a mission. These are missionaries. Edward Guthrie. When I asked him about financial arrangements for his mission, he responded, "Bishop, I have been working and have saved $3,500, and I plan to pay for every penny of the mission myself." Fine feeling. Of course he was a fine missionary. I received a call from the chapel one morning, very early, telling me that the drains had been obstructed and there was an inch or more of mud and water over the entire first floor. This is a conference in Joinville, taken with a flash picture. I arrived at the chapel to check things out to see what to do, just as the seminary was ending. As I walked across the cultural hall, these young men came hurriedly to meet me. The first said, "Bishop, may I stay and help clean up?" The second said, "I've already called my mom, and she says it's okay for me to stay and miss a few classes at school." So it went on with the group. Arrangements were quickly made for clothes changing, and the work began immediately. Here's a baptism. They started with the large mops and wringer buckets. Work commenced. I made phone calls applicable to such situation. In just a few minutes, returned to the scene of operations. The mops had been discarded. Here's a missionary on a bicycle. The mops had been discarded as too slow. Instead, they found the lowest spot, and large scoop shovels, large dustpans, etc., were being used with much enthusiasm and effectiveness. A ward picnic. As fast as the bucket was filled, it was carried outside and emptied, while others were being filled. At this point, the fellows told the others things they wanted, quickly to bring the project to a quick, successful conclusion. "Bishop, we need large squeegees, a lot of rags, and help from the Relief Society." I complied. I called the president of the Relief Society, and she is not at home. I called her first counselor, Sister Newton, and she responded and was there almost before I could turn around. She came in with paws, cleansers, buckets, and all the paraphernalia that only an inspired sister would know was needed. The first young man, Hal Clark, saw her and asked with complete absence of timidity and bashfulness, "Where's the food?" He told her that the primary purpose of the Relief Society at a time like this was to furnish food for their willing workers. This oversight was immediately remedied by dipping into the bishop's fund. As we progressed, I told the young men they need to be careful and not just to mar the tile with the buckets and shovels and dustpans. They replied, "Don't worry, Bishop, everything's under real good control." And it was. There were quite a few experiences of our fellows and girls doing well and working around the chapel. One occasion I remember, this particular Saturday afternoon, we had a work project where the young ladies were working inside the building and the young men working on the outside. We had a number of projects planned for the young men, including sodding, weeding, fertilizing, rototilling, edging the lawns, etc. I was working operating a large-sized rototiller and required considerable energy to keep it going properly. Here's a baseball game, softball game in Salt Lake where our boys worked. I felt very good when Robert McCoy came by and took over the job. We actually had 2 rototillers preparing beds for the sod. They worked so well that we could not keep up with them laying the sod. The sod laying operation was very intriguing. It was a strict passing operation. The fellows lined up and passed the sod one to another, and the one on the other line unrolled it and laid it in its place. It was a case of us soldiers trying to keep up and out of the way of these energetic young men. They did it well, laying the sod evenly and filling every void. Not only were all the tasks performed well and quickly, the young men also came up with suggestions of their own in what additional tasks could be accomplished that day. Now the work was completed and it was time for sports, so everyone enjoyed the sports for approximately an hour. While the sports were going on, here's the Hill Cumorah. 3 lovely sisters in the ward, Sister Rinda Sudweeks, Emily Packer, and Louise Mason, were preparing a veritable pizza feast. They prepared homemade pizza of several different varieties with excellent punch. The pizza was served piping hot, that is, staying in the oven till it was actually served a la carte per individual order. Again, we're at the beach. The young men walk through the chapel, Niagara Falls, move under a basket, jump up and swat the net with one or both hands. One day, one of our taller young ladies walked under the basket, and just as nonchalantly and naturally as could be, jumped up and gracefully gave the net a swat. Delightful. Emily and I picked up the girls coming home from camp. We had a smaller than average car and had several girls with their gear to take home. They filled the trunk to the brim, and still some of the gear had to go inside. They started getting into the car, placing themselves so that all might get in. They were at least 2 deep everywhere, and still one girl just couldn't get in. They said, let's unload and rearrange ourselves more advantageously according to size. They did, and by everyone exhaling in unison, we managed to get everyone in and close the doors. Since we didn't have too far to go, it was not too uncomfortable. We admired their resourcefulness. In the Capitol, our young ladies were very enthusiastic in their sports and had a lot of fun. One season we had 3 full basketball teams. This was a very successful year, and our 2 top teams ended up playing for the state championship. A good crowd gathered, and we all cheered loudly for Falls Church Ward. Since both teams were from our ward, it was an unusually fun situation. One MIA evening, Sister Focia Ricks, one of the leaders in the Young Ladies Organization, spoke to the group and told them quite emphatically that they not only had considerable about which to be happy, but also they were actually having a good time and enjoying life as much as they should. It was very nice, and the group liked it very much.
It would be very silent if no birds sang there except those who sang best. I'm Violet Aitchison Kirby, and this is a picture of me at my high school graduation. This is Ken and I at a church party in Falls Church, Virginia. Ken, Sharon, and Karen and I at home in Virginia. This is Karen and Sharon at about age 5, and they were twin daughters of Mars. Devin and Candace is our very first great-grandchildren of Swayze. This is the bishopric of Falls Church, Virginia. This is Morley Christensen, Phil Horn, and Ellis Packer. These are Ellis's daughters and also my daughters at our wedding dinner. It's a picture of Ellis and I at Brett's wedding in Virginia. Ellis and I on our mission in Los Angeles, California from 85 to 87. This is me just before Ellis and I were married. This is 4 generations: Kimberly Backstone, me, Sharon, Swayze, and Candace. These are our praying hands. Ellis is holding my hand down. We celebrated our wedding in Hawaii and had a very good time there for about a week. We went to the beach about every day, Waikiki, my daughter and her husband, Dale Hendrickson, and all of their family at the wedding of their daughter, Corey. This is the blessing of Derek. This is Sharon and Devin, and myself, Kimberly and Derek and Candace. Ellis and I in Virginia, standing behind our little dogwood tree. This is Ellis and I at our very first Kirby reunion, and I initiated him with a small pie, chocolate pie in his face, but he also had to retaliate by and these beautiful hibiscus plant. This is our home in St. George that was under construction. Ellis and I shortly after we arrived in St. George. Charmel and Kenny and Natasha Swayze. This is Sharon's and Clyde's family all together, and our great-grandchildren there. This is the blessing of Devin and Kirk and Derek and Rick and Ken and Ellis and Devin.
I have been very fortunate in my lifetime. Violet says I am quite spoiled and that she gives Emily the credit. I believe I have been spoiled and am being spoiled and enjoy it very much. Emily was president of the primary and the Relief Society in the ward, served on the Relief Society State Board, and served in a number of teaching positions. She was especially effective in the primary, loving the children a great deal, and very concerned for their welfare and safety. I walked in the classroom one time when she was teaching. She was telling a story, and one little boy was just enthralled. He was leaning way forward to be sure he'd get every word. Emily is a very effective mother, does not believe in spanking, and never did. Our children are all doing well due to her great love for them. She served a number by listening to their troubles. She was indeed a peacemaker. Violet and I have done quite well together. We served a terrific mission and enjoyed it very much. We served with the Asian group and made fine friends there. She was a Maya-Maid leader for 16 years, Ward Relief Society counselor and primary counselor, in-service leader in the primary, work leader in the Relief Society, state primary counselor, genealogical librarian, and a teacher in other positions. She says that the only organization in which she hasn't served is the priesthood. Here in St. George, a neighbor 2 doors away lost her husband and also losing her eyesight. She is in her upper 80s. Violet visits her every morning, reads her mail, scriptures, and etc. Each afternoon, this lady comes and visits Violet for half an hour. Violet regularly gives another neighbor her vitamin B shots. Here's Glenn Carlin and a group of people. These are indicative of the things Violet does for her neighbors. We have tried to be especially friendly and have been highly commended by our neighbors. At this riding, we have lived in St. George for more than 4 years and really enjoy it here. We are very happy together. We are trying to plan to visit our children and grandchildren as great-grandchildren as often as we can. Violet made the point that this is the only way to really keep up with what is going on in each family. We really enjoy commendable close with our families. Violet also, I am continuing. Here's a picture of our wedding, that lovely cake that Violet's brother made. I am continuing my sealing work, in other words, ordinance work in the temple. I plan to do some work in the temple every day it's open. Violet also serves regularly in the temple. We derive a tremendous enjoyment and accomplishment from this service. We really love you all very much. Our sincere counsel is that you go to the temple at the very least once per month. Our opinion is that the most successful way to be happy is to follow the prophet.